Well, y'all have drew the short straw one more time. Actually, two more times if you're here next week. Next week we'll end this quarter up. And me and Neil had to do some swapping around because of his schedule, so I've got the last two. Tonight, we're going to talk about a man who may seem very well known, but he is a minor character in the New Testament, even though he did write one of the four Gospels, and that man is Mark, or John Mark. So we can start just by talking about his Gospel. Now, we're not told anywhere in there or anywhere that he wrote that book. He doesn't sign his name to it anywhere. So we're going off of church history. And so early church leaders, names are Irenaeus, Clement of Alexandria, Eusebius, Origen, and also a guy named Papias. He possibly, or he could have been around with some of the apostles were still alive and teaching and preaching. All of those guys attribute the Gospel of Mark to Mark, even though he doesn't attribute to himself. So that's kind of how we come up with that. He's an interesting character. There's a lot of things that we can learn from him. The first thing is his first. If you turn over to Mark chapter 14, there's a little bit of a. Well, it's just an odd little insert in the middle of this. It's in the section where Jesus is being betrayed and arrested in the garden, and so starting at verse 50, talking about all of his disciples, he said they all forsook him and fled. Now a certain young man followed him, having a linen cloth thrown around his naked body, and the young men laid hold of him. And he left the linen cloth and fled from them naked. Now, that just seems odd. Nobody else, none of the other four Gospels record that. It seems to be, according to a lot of people that, at least they seem smarter than I am, they claim that is probably Mark himself, John Mark, as a young man. So what's going on there is Jesus is being betrayed. He's been arrested in the garden. Mark, at this point, is probably a really young guy. I don't know what that would be in that time. 16, 17, 18. And he's interested in what's going on. And so he follows, and he's seeing what's going on with Jesus. He's there. He wants to be part of it. But when some of the people who have laid hands on Jesus see he's there, he splits. He leaves him his clothes. He runs off. What says he flees naked. Now, Hiram gave us some information that said that may or may not be completely naked, but that's what it says, so I don't know. But, there is something that, if that is in fact Mark, and we have no reason to believe it is or it isn't, but it's odd that it's in his gospel. He's the only one that records it. It's kind of like in John's gospel. A lot of times he refers to himself as what?
Love. Also Jesus loved.
The one whom Jesus loved. Yeah, he never refers to him as himself. So it is plausible that this is Mark talking about himself. He would be the one who would know that if it was him. But the thing that I find interesting about that is, as a young man, he had enough desire to be around Jesus in hard times. So he was there. He wanted to be close. But when times got hard, he run. Now, there's going to be some events later on in his life that kind of maybe mirror that a little bit. But nonetheless, he was around. Some of the other stuff that we know about Mark from early on in his life is He's a product of great parenting, great influences, and great opportunities. So, does anybody know who his mother was?
Mary.
His mother was Mary. Anything else? Flip over to Acts chapter 12. And verse 12 says, "So when he had considered this," that is Peter, "he came to the house of Mary, the mother of John, whose surname was Mark, where many were gathered together praying." So, Mark's mother was, she was an influential woman in the early church. Obviously, that probably shaped and molded Mark to who he became. He was around a lot of good influences and a lot of good people. Think of who else would he have been around in that circumstance, in that situation? I hear some of y'all whispering. Well, let's just read what was going on here. Peter was in prison. Constant prayer was being offered for him. Herod had just killed James, and he had in mind that it's what he's going to do to Peter. Peter was miraculously released by some angels, and when he left, he went. So start at verse 10. When they were past the first and second guard posts, they came to the iron gate that leads to the city, which opened to them of its own accord. And they went out and went down one street, and immediately the angel departed from him. When Peter had come to himself, he said, "Now I know for certain that the Lord has sent his angel, and he has delivered me from the hand of Herod, and from all the expectation of the Jewish people." So when he considered this, he came to the house of Mary, the mother of John, whose surname was Mark, where many were gathered together praying. And as Peter knocked at the door of the gate, a girl named Rhoda came to answer. And when she recognized Peter's voice, because of her gladness, she did not open the gate, but ran in and announced that Peter stood before the gate. But they said to her, "You are beside yourself." Yet she kept insisting, and so they said, "It is his angel." Now Peter continued knocking, and when they went and opened the door and saw him, they were astonished. Did you catch right there in verse 14, when it says, when she, that is the servant girl, recognized Peter's voice? You know what that tells me?
Wasn't his first time at Mary's house.
That wasn't his first time at Mary's house. You know, Peter had been there. And so John Mark, he was around folks like Peter, who were pillars of the church. He had been surrounded by godly people. Now, did that make him perfect in everything that he did? No. Look, guys, I know we ain't got 30 minutes, but you know how I am when I go through my lessons like Neil and them do. I can get it like 17, 18 minutes, so y'all gonna have to do some talking. No, he wasn't. He was used to being around godly people. And I think that one of the things that we can draw out of that is the more that we can surround ourselves with godly people, the better our future and the better we are able to help in the church will be. It strengthens us. You know, it helps us. And it helped John Mark. Another person that was very influential in his life was Barnabas. You know, that was his cousin, right? Now, what is one of the things, or what is the one thing? If I say to you, tell me what you know about John Mark, what are you going to say? What's the first thing that comes to mind?
Him and Paul didn't see eye to eye for a while.
Okay. So what did he do?
They departed because Paul didn't want him to go with them, but Barnabas did.
Right. So Mark was on the first missionary journey. And he went to several cities with Paul and Barnabas. They come to a point when he got back, he didn't want to go any further. And we don't really know why. You know, maybe he was homesick. Maybe there had been something happen. You know, maybe he needed to go home. But he left. And whatever the reason was, one of the things that seems to stick out to everybody is that Mark left. He deserted. Him and Paul, they didn't see eye to eye when it come around to the second missionary journey. Paul didn't want to take him with him because of what he had done the first time. Now, maybe that was just because Paul didn't think he needed to go home. I don't know. But through all of that, you know, to Paul, at that time, and what do we all think of Paul? You know, he's a pillar of the church, right? But he was wrong. He was wrong right there in that situation to not take John Mark with him. You know, we can get in disagreements and not want to work through it, and not want to deal with it, and just let it go on. But if there hadn't been a Barnabas, then John Mark would have never been what he became. Now, so far as we know, he never preached a sermon. He never taught a lesson. He never baptized anybody. So far as we know, we don't have a lot about him. There's only 9 verses that mention his name specifically. But because of how Barnabas reacted, he pulled him along. Sometimes we need to be a Barnabas, you know. Sometimes we need a Barnabas in our life, you know. There's a lot of things to learn from Mark. What say you?
Goes along with Chase's message of community.
It really does.
Yeah.
Yeah, Chase had a great message tonight. He really did. We all need each other. We need to help each other. We need to hold each other up. Sometimes we need to hold each other accountable. Mark was on the receiving end of some of that, but it helped him. If you look at later on in his life, you know, Paul changed his tune about him. So whatever it was, maybe Mark grew some. Maybe Paul softened some. But he become a great asset to the church.
You know, Kevin, you say that Paul was wrong in not taking him.
No, I said maybe he was.
Well, maybe he was, maybe he wasn't.
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes that motivation of someone saying, hey, you need to change.
Yeah.
In order to push him along, to make him. Maybe Barnabas did it. He helped him along. But it may have been the motivation coming from Paul of,
Yeah.
if you're not ready, you need to grow up, you need to change, you need to do better.
Yep. And see, there's so many things that, I mean, obviously we don't need to know it, or we would have been told. But I got so many questions about all that. You know, maybe Barnabas took him along because what would Mark's mother be? His aunt? Be Barnabas' aunt? Is that right? Yeah.
Cousins.
So maybe Aunt Mary told Barnabas, "Hey, you make sure you take care of him." You know, I don't know. She obviously was pretty. At least for that time, she would have been considered wealthy. There was a few things that we can gather from just where we talk about her back in Acts 12. First of all, she had a servant girl that answered the gate. So it's called Mary's house. What happened to Mark's dad, we don't know, but there's a lot of indications that she was pretty well to do. So maybe she had a lot of influence on Barnabas as well. But sometimes we need people to prod us along. And maybe in the conversation when Barnabas and Mark were going along, you know, maybe Barnabas talked through him and helped him, you know, this is where you went wrong. This is what you need to be doing. Whatever it was, it worked. It helped him. What else do we know? It seems as though on the missionary journeys, Mark seems to be, for lack of a better word, more clerical kind of work. He they called him his helper. Acts 13:5, when Barnabas and Saul reached Salamis, they began to proclaim the word of God in the synagogues of the Jews, and they also had John as their helper. How many Pauls and Barnabases did they need on a missionary journey? One of the things that we can learn from John Mark, is, we all have different abilities and different talents. We don't all have to be a Paul or a Barnabas. Sometimes we need somebody just to take notes. Sometimes we just need somebody to paddle a boat. We all can be something. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons from looking at Mark's life, is he was okay not being out in front, not being heard, just being whatever you want to call it, clerical. Do we sometimes look at those positions as, do we look down on those positions ever? Do we ever think that, I know I do. For me personally, I think I don't really have any business standing up here in front of this class when we got guys like Neil and Hiram. As talented as they are, I don't have any business up here. But we all got abilities. We're not all going to be those guys. We're not all going to be whatever any of you all are. It takes us all. And I think we need to be mindful that, don't ever, whatever position we're in, whatever role we're able to fulfill, don't ever think of it as minor or not needed, not necessary. Is that ever an issue for anybody or anything? Good. It's good.
I think you don't know until you do it sometimes.
You're right.
Like staying at home.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks that's a piece of cake and it's not.
Right.
It's just, we judge people by what we know.
Sure.
And when you're put into that situation, it helps you.
Yeah. Very good. Anything else? Anybody ever find herself not feeling particularly useful or needed, or don't think that your talent is worth anything? If you do, read back through Mark's life. He's mentioned 9 times. He wrote a book, didn't even sign his name to it. But he was one of the most influential and important people in the first century church. He was on the very first missionary journey, some of the second. He was important. He didn't do anything great that we know of, but he must have done something good. Anything else?
Kevin, this whole class that you all had this semester, this quarter, has talked about people that you don't think much of, or that you don't read about much, or that you don't study about much, or that you don't know much about. You're in the Bible. You're in there for a reason. And I don't know about you all, but my name is in the Bible. I'd be pretty happy about it, regardless of what I did.
Yeah.
So we need to remember that. It doesn't matter what you do, as long as our name's there and we're doing what God wants us to.
Yep.
No matter how small or how big.
That's right. We've all got a part to play. And I think sometimes that, maybe not for y'all, but sometimes for me, I get caught up in my part's not important. It's kind of small. I'm not needed. I guess in my life, I guess we just call that, for me, just a self-pity party. You'll have one of them every once in a while. But it takes us all. If the college kids come in here to eat tonight, I don't know how it worked tonight. I know how it works a lot of times. Sometimes sometimes the person serving some food didn't do no cooking. Maybe it wasn't that way tonight, maybe.
It all comes from Sam's.
Huh? Huh?
It all comes from Sam's and Myers.
So nobody serving tonight done no cooking. But if there wasn't nobody serving, guess what? It'd been hard for them to eat. So if there hadn't been a Sam's open today, it'd been a problem. They'd been hungry tonight, right? That's what I'm saying, guys. Small things, just keep things moving along. Don't ever think that your part's too small.
Kevin, a while ago when we were reading that scripture, you know, there's a lot of people that aren't named. We've always talked about that, just because they're not named, and you're not. A while ago when you were reading that scripture and it said a girl named Rhoda.
Mm-hmm.
So why all of a sudden is Rhoda? You know, like, who's Rhoda, you know?
Yeah, well, I don't know. She's not one of the minor ones that I'm gonna deal with. So, I'm just saying.
We ain't gonna have a class.
Yeah,
of
she's
road.
way too minor because that's all I got right there on her.
I'm just saying, that's funny
But she
why they called her by name.
Yeah.
It just said a girl named Rhoda.
Yeah.
And then that's all it said.
Yeah, but you know, I mean, it's very important because that tells us from that verse right there. That tells us that Peter was a regular at that house because Rhoda knew his voice. She didn't see his face; she recognized his voice. Keep ourselves around good influences, godly examples.
You know, imagine Mark was not, you know, we're doing a lot of speculating, so I'll speculate a little further. We don't really see John Mark as being in the small circle of Jesus, in his small circle.
Right.
But we see him on the fringes of it. And obviously he had a great relationship with Peter. So I'm thinking, where do all his details to write an account about the life of Christ come from? Well, it almost had to come from the apostles, namely Peter. And then you think about how the book of Mark is different than the other accounts.
Yep.
It relies really heavily on the miracles
Mhm.
and not so much the one-on-one interaction and dialogue that you see in the other accounts. So
Right.
it's almost like he's taking notes from somebody that really was there.
I have got it wrote down somewhere. Guys, I have prepared, you'd think I'd be really good at this because I prepared for this class. Today was the third time. It was going to be taught 2 different times and some changes happened, but you would think I'd have this memorized, but my brain don't work that way. But I've got in here somewhere that it seems to be also church history, early church history tells us that he wrote this with the help of Peter, which completely, you know, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, if he had spent a lot of time around him, Peter had been at his house, he was a familiar guest, so it's completely plausible that, you know, Peter did help John Mark write this. Godly influences. Keep ourselves around people that will help make us better. You know, one of the things that has been talked about a lot through classes in the last, I don't know, several months. I think Barrett and Dave had some classes on, I think last quarter maybe, on, you know, the difficulties of being wealthy and trying to be a Christian, or have money and be a Christian. But we can get a pretty good example from Mark's mother. All indications are that, you know, she was pretty well to do, but she used everything that she had to push the kingdom forward. She had influential leaders of the church, were familiar and regular guests in her house. It doesn't say who all, but there was apparently a lot of people there praying for Peter. So she used her money to the best way that could be for the Lord. And I dare say that all of us in this country we're blessed more so than anybody probably in any other country as a people as a whole. We have been granted things, and we live in a country that allows us to do well. We should be able to promote the gospel better than any country in the world because the means is here. We can use those things. Another problem I've got is I've got 4 different groups of notes. I want to talk for just a minute about towards the end. In Acts 15, let's just flip over there for just a minute and catch that. And that's where they were going out on their second missionary journey. So verse 37. Well, let's just start at verse 36. Acts 15:36. Then after some days, Paul said to Barnabas, "Let us now go back and visit our brethren in every city where we have preached the word and see how they are doing." Now Barnabas was determined to take with them John called Mark, but Paul insisted that they should not take with him the one who had departed from them in Pamphylia and had not gone with him to the work. Then the contention became so sharp that they departed from one another. And so Barnabas took Mark, sailed to Cyprus, but Paul chose Silas and departed, being commended by the brethren of the grace of God. And he went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening churches. So they get into a disagreement. Does anybody see any good come out of that?
They split up.
Huh?
They split up.
Hey, they got
More
twice
areas
as much
open.
stuff done.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't say anything about they were going to take Silas with them until the contention became so sharp that Barnabas said, "I'm taking him and we're going here." Paul had to find him somebody. So they got twice as much stuff done. Maybe the reason of the start wasn't that great. You know, maybe they shouldn't have been arguing or shouldn't have been fussing. Maybe Barnabas's aunt told him, "You make sure you get that boy and take him with you." You know, I don't know. Maybe that's why he was so adamant that he was going. Maybe it was that when he had left earlier, he was young and immature, and he just needed a second chance. You know, that might could be any of us at some point in our lives. You know, if people had given up on me whenever I was young, you know, we don't ever want to give up on anybody. We want to encourage, and that's exactly what, you know, Barnabas is known as a son of encouragement. We want to encourage anyone to do better and to help. We can't promote wrong, but we certainly want to draw people along and help them be better if we can. And that's the goal. You know, another allusion back to Chase's lesson tonight. You know, that's a good part of being family. Is we want to hold each other together. We need to hold each other together. We're commanded to hold each other together. So that's what Barnabas did for Mark. And so far as we know, from that point on, Mark was he was a great asset to the church. Look at what Paul says in well, several times. In Philemon, he calls Mark my fellow worker. In 2 Timothy 4, he says, "Only Luke is with me. Pick up Mark and bring him with you, for he is useful for me in service." Same guy that he didn't want to take, you know, a few years earlier. Now he's useful. You know, don't ever give up on anybody. Help keep pulling them along. We got to pull them along. Sometimes it's going to be difficult. Days will be hard. But at least for the end of Mark, you know, he become a useful servant, useful tool to Paul. He wanted him around. What else? We don't know a lot, but we know these few things. He was probably come from a wealthy family. We don't know anything about his dad. We know that he was on the first missionary journey. He was one of the first missionaries. We know that he deserted them for some reason. We know that he was reinstated. We know that he became useful. He never done, so far as we know, any great works in the kingdom. We don't read of any miracles that he done. He's just like one of us, you know. None of us in here are ever going to pull off a miracle. We may not do, you know, we may not do the greatest of things. We may not travel all over the world, but we're all on some level just like Mark, just normal people working hard to try and spread the gospel, and that's what he did. He had 9 verses in the Bible. Some people get books, chapters, and a lot of stuff written about him. Mark only had 9 things. That's 9 more than I've got. He's important, and we can learn a lot from him. Anybody got anything else?
Did you mention he was Barnabas' cousin?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Peter refers to him, there's a note in my Bible.
Yeah.
That he refers to him as Mark, my son,
Mhm.
in 1 Peter chapter 5. So he was with Peter at that time
Yeah.
during the writing of that letter.
Yeah, so they were so close that he felt like he was his son. Yeah. I'll say it again, guys. I'm not going to say it too much. The best group of people that we can spend our time around is here in these walls. We can't isolate ourselves here, but we all become stronger by being together. And that's all I've got. So y'all suffered through it. You got one more. We might talk about Rhoda next week. I don't know. It'll be a short class, though.
I'll do some research on that.